Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining today's session. You're joining this session on direct sourcing. We're talking about how to build a direct sourcing business, joined by some amazing panelists here today. We're actually going to start out with some panelists intros first, and then I'll introduce who I am, and we'll jump right into the session. So with that, Karen, we'll let you kick us off, say hello, and tell us a little bit about your company.
Sure. My name is Karen Gonzalez. I'm the Executive Vice President for LiveHire. I really am responsible for running the North American business. LiveHire has been in business about 10 years now. We are a total talent platform that really specializes in direct sourcing here in North America. We are a publicly traded company, and just really excited about the conversation today. As far as my background, I've really spent my entire career in kind of this workforce solutions space. So started on the staffing side, was a chief sales officer for a large global MSP, and then landed at LiveHire about 2 years ago. So thanks for joining.
And Sammy, say hello. Tell us a little bit about WorkNow.
Hi, I'm Sammy Singh, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of WorkNow. We are basically a digital staffing platform for hourly talent. So I've been in the staffing industry, mainly on the blue collar side, and our solution is basically sold to the staffing industry. And I've been at this for about close to 25 years and always ran staffing agencies and have really worked towards making this whole experience digital. So thank you so much.
And Praneeth.
Hello, everyone. My name is Praneeth Patlola. I'm the CEO and co-founder, or was CEO co-founder for WillHire, which is now part of Pro Unlimited. Most of you probably heard or know about Pro Unlimited, one of the large MSP, VMS, talent solution organization, global organization in the world, deploying contingent workforce solution as an emphasis. What WillHire is and still is and is a direct sourcing solution, which is addressing a majority of talent acquisition needs and enabling customers to engage and build talent pools, leveraging their employer brand. And we address that in two different fashions, while professional, which becomes obvious now for us, most of the industry, but we pivoted ourselves into a second line of business on light industrial, or also extending that into healthcare side of the business now, which is more shift-based engagement, and what we call that as an Uberizing of contingent staffing programs. The background, engineering for most part. I've not been 25 years in the industry. I'm a bit younger, but most of my time has been building solutions. In the past, building a recruitment marketplace. Prior to that, building another similar solutions. My first attempt was to build a vendor management system for state of Texas.
Awesome. Thanks, Praneeth, and thank you, everyone. So I'm Dustin Talley. I run a company called Talent Simplified. So I'm an independent consultant in the space. After spending a decade promoting independence and direct sourcing, the topic we're talking about here today, I myself jumped into really both of those worlds by launching something on my own. And then it's specifically focused on helping companies with their direct sourcing strategy. So direct sourcing, we'll talk about what it is in a moment, but I'm guessing if you're here, you're either A, building a business around direct sourcing, exploring that, you've been building it perhaps, or B, you think, why the heck does this word keep coming up? I've been hearing direct sourcing nonstop for the last couple of weeks. Jump in line. I think those of us here on the call have probably heard it the last couple of years. Or C, you probably know someone here, right? And you're just supporting us and jumping on and joining the chat. So whether one of those is you or not, we're glad to have you on the call. So we'll talk a little bit about direct sourcing. So what is it? And let me be the first to say, I don't actually love the term direct sourcing. I think it stuck though, much like MSP and VMS did years ago, right? We can all kind of think back to that time. Direct sourcing showed up, at least as far back as I can remember, about 7 or 8 years ago. I remember using the term. And I would say back then it was very much a buzzword. We were kind of just throwing some marketing language out there, and it meant whatever you want it to mean. Now, yes, it's still a buzzword, but it actually has context because we're seeing businesses do it, direct sourcing that is. And so direct sourcing from my lens is really leveraging a company's brand to attract and deploy talent to that company. So the main difference in staffing and direct sourcing is just the leveraging of the company's brand. That allows you to do a whole host of things. We'll talk about a lot of those in this session here today, especially for those of you looking to build a business around direct sourcing. So with that, obviously, if you guys have something to add to the direct sourcing context, I'll open that up to you. But I'd like to jump in and just Sammy, ask you, why the heck are companies taking notice now, right? Why now?
I mean, my audience is always the staffing agencies, right? So I see it from their standpoint. For them, it's cutting into their margins. I mean, back in the day when we used to run programs, and if a client wanted to hire directly, we'd have an allergic reaction right then and there and say, my God, I can do this for you. So there's a lack of talent. Also, due to the lack of talent, direct sourcing and getting the client's brand up front is very critical, because that's the only way you could probably recruit. Agencies in many areas, I'm mainly in the light industrial space, with a little over 150,000 people on our platform. It is just nuts with the way they are trying to recruit and get the people in. And I'm talking light industrial and warehousing. So it's when a client starts recruiting, direct sourcing comes in, suddenly it is getting into your margins. Your client is also maybe deploying tools, because the tools today are so much more superior than our clients used to have 10, 15 years ago. They have the same tool set. So if a staffing agency does not have the tool set, the client has a much bigger edge on them. And then also the type of employee. A lot of them are going into this whole gig space, or they want to just work on demand. All of these things are factoring into it, that staffing agencies really have to look into this seriously and partner up with their clients. And not, this is not a way we can fight. It's 360 degrees it took. 20 years ago, it used to be there, then it went away, it came back. It's really driven by the talent. At the end of the day, they're the ones we are serving. And if the client can do that in a much more effective manner, they should.
I love that. Anything to add, Praneeth or Karen, to that? Why are companies taking notice?
I think it's, a large part of this is really figuring out how can staffing companies fit into the ecosystem, and what does that look like, and what do they need to do to evolve their organization today to be able to deliver a really successful direct sourcing solution to their clients.
I think it comes down to opportunity, business, and money at this stage where we are as an industry, which is going through the cusp of this large adoption or attempt to the adoption into a transformation of it. It will impact the business. So that's why everybody is paying attention to it. Earlier, we used to call this as myths. It's never going to happen. But now the reality is completely different. And at the same time, I think the industries compared to us, to others, I think people have seen this not for the first time. It happens to travel industry, where about 10,000 agency businesses were basically displaced when the modeling structure in that industry was disrupted. And that is because how businesses, which are end enterprises versus consumers, which is the reason the industry exists and we are all here for, that with technology is evolving and how the future of this would impact. And this is something not of a concern, but something everybody in the staffing industry has to plan for, to find a place where there would be, and there is place for everything.
Yeah, no, I love that. Yeah, Praneeth, I remember last year you pulling me aside at a conference and just mentioning to me, like with a grin on your face, it's happening. Like this stuff we've been talking about for a long time, right? Because I think a lot of us in the space, we do talk about it, and it was a buzzword 5 years ago. Now it's a buzzword with some legs under it. And I think companies are taking notice, right? We saw some data last year, actually, that 60% of enterprise buyers are looking at doing something with direct sourcing. And I think anytime you see a stat like that, everyone takes notice, and now you start seeing solutions pop up. So I'd say to the audience, if you're not thinking about how you fit into this whole direct sourcing ecosystem, it's very much like the MSP days, the VMS MSP days were 15 years ago. if you were to look at that time and what's evolved over those 15 years, keeping in mind that the rate of change is accelerating. And I don't think it's going to take 15 years for this to take off. So very, very interested to see where this goes, obviously. So Karen, question for you. I know you guys see a lot of direct sourcing programs over at LiveHire. What are some elements you guys are seeing that staffing companies are putting in or making these programs successful? What are some of those elements you guys see?
So I think it's really important to understand, the components of direct sourcing. So think of it as kind of a three-legged stool. So you've got people, which is your curation. You've got process, which includes compliance and payrolling. And then you've got the technology. And it's really our job to come together and offer a holistic solution to our clients, with the goal being to scale the program as quickly as possible in order to really drive the benefits and value of the direct sourcing program. And really, in order to do that, there's some things that you should be thinking about from a strategic perspective. So one is change management. What are the things that are required both from the client and from the staffing organization in order to make this happen? What are the differences between, recruiting and curation, and what does that involve? Making sure that you've got executive sponsorship both internally and also from your client, and making sure that they're involving the right stakeholders at the right levels to really be champions for direct sourcing as you're implementing and moving forward. Being able to offer great curation services, having dedicated recruiters that are going to focus on curation for a specific client. I think there's different opinions about whether it's better to do big bang or start small. And I really think it just depends on who you're working with and the company's, the client's appetite for change. Direct sourcing can work for all roles, all sectors. It's more about being able to gather holistic data to be able to implement a more proactive approach to recruiting. So it's recruiting ahead of the requisition, making sure that you're building those talent pools. They should be private talent pools, in our opinion, for that particular client. Understanding what best practices are when it comes to direct sourcing. That could be making sure that your client understands that they have to use their brand. I mean, that's really a critical piece of direct sourcing. And I would say it's not just about using the brand. I think, a lot of staffing companies can probably sit here and say, look, ABC company allowed us to use their brand to source talent. The difference is when you're curating for a specific company and utilizing a direct sourcing approach, you're creating an asset for that client. And you have dedicated recruiters that are building that private talent pool that becomes an asset for that client, versus if I'm a traditional staffing company, I go out and recruit for ABC company, I get 100 applicants, but I can only place 5. What happens to the other 95 candidates? Those candidates will typically get placed elsewhere if at all possible, right? In a direct sourcing scenario, those candidates stay within the talent pool and are nurtured within that talent pool to be able to redeploy at any given time when a requisition comes through. So I think those are some things to think about as you're considering direct sourcing.
Yeah, I love the three-legged stool kind of analogy, right? It's not technology alone, or at least it doesn't sound that way. I think years ago, people thought maybe direct sourcing was just flip a switch and magically this thing all worked. Praneeth, does it work that way? Can you just flip a switch? Where do humans come into this, right? The three-legged stool that Karen's mentioning here.
Well, I wish it was a switch. Then we can actually just run everything on tech, but it's not technically. I think direct sourcing as a definition for me in an execution style, what it means for an enterprise, what it means for an industry is 3 parts of it. You start with attracting the talent and engaging the talent and curating the talent. All that can have 2 pieces of puzzle. One is the technology by itself, which becomes a critical part of it. But the most important part is the curation services, which, although I don't like the terminology, which is now generalized, the curation can be rebranded at some point as we move forward as the program management of direct sourcing, which combines how do you engage this candidate? How do you attract? Do you have the right budget? If you don't have the right budget, you need to go and buy into that budget. Are you going to be marking up into your model? Are you going to drive that model? Each of that are people's decision. On top of that, you still need to build out engagement models which are very specific for talent engagement based on what kind of category and several aspects of it. And the last piece of the puzzle, payroll. These people has to be payroll. Without that, it's going to be chaotic. And having an extremely streamlined process is something which much more important in that case, so that there is a unified experience. All the stakeholders have to come together to agree to it, whether it's going to be MSP, VMS, your staffing providers even included into this conversation, how that impacts them, and what is the payroll service responsibilities, how do you manage and enable your candidates to convert to full time, because in the shortage of talent where we are, you still need to build out enough flexibility into the program and how you enable candidates to convert. And that's something we have seen enterprises take a bit more seriously now.
Yeah, and I think there's actually a fourth leg of the stool, right? And that's really the candidate and the candidate experience, and making that really central to everything that we do. If that candidate experience isn't a good one, they will go elsewhere. And when a client thinks of how they're going to represent their brand out in the market, things like Glassdoor and NPS scores and all of those things impact how people see your brand. And so if there's a great candidate experience, the way that that person will represent your brand and talk about your company will be much better than if they don't have a good experience.
I love that. Yeah, there's been a lot of talk this week in World Staffing Summit about candidate experience, just as it pertains to staffing companies and how they build experiences for the talent. And I think how much more important when these brands, and we're representing those brands, that we've got to get it right? The technology, the process, the overall experience has to align and reflect that brand's core values and everything they stand for as a company, right? That's actually a good segue. I want to talk a lot about the client brand in this, right? So when we think about staffing, I'm so used to seeing the roles, a big four this, a large tech company is looking for, right? And so this opens up the ability to start using that brand. And I think there are a lot of avenues behind that once you open up that brand. So as we start thinking down, just direct sourcing and leveraging that client's brand, what are some strategies you guys are seeing your partners or the companies you support leveraging that are working well?
I could take this, and I think as you indicated, the direct sourcing is kind of eliminating the mystery around the mystery client on internet, which floats around majority of the service of jobs. That's a key advantage for the experience. But as Karen mentioned, that candidate experience modeling, that has to be very unique. Many a times you also have to enable customers to create a different EVP, or EVP is always referred as employer value proposition, but instead of employee, you really need to figure out what is your contingent candidate value proposition part of that process, what messaging is more relevant to them from the first touch point of that enablement all the way through the next level of engagements, and bringing clarity to them as such through that engagement from an employer branding. Second really good aspect especially is also the carefulness about managing that particular branding, because now you're leveraging a larger brand to the market, which is delivered through this direct engagement, which was never done in this particular space. So you really need to put enough emphasis on resources who are building that particular brand and engagement. And for that engagement model drives very much clean from content that you're delivering. Many practices customers starting to use are building newsletters, sending out updates. Here is where you're engaging candidates through social campaigns. So you're also building this particular talent brand, not just in a segmented way, but more of thinking in a holistic way on what other touch points do you want this candidate to be engaged, and still protecting your brand reputation around this journey.
I mean, I'm looking at even a talent. I mean, imagine the tough position they're in. You've got all these brands hitting them up, and each one is vying for your business in a way. Come recruit me, and I've got 10 brands. How many apps could I possibly download? at least in my space where it's light industrial, you're hopping from one place to another. And at the end of the day, the client's the same, which is what Praneeth just said. At the end of the day, there's one client, Amazon, hiring, but there's 20 staffing agencies in between. Not only are they hitting you up directly, and everybody else is as well. And the more cohesive we get in the contingent workforce, the better it'll be. That's where looking at the candidate side is going to be to where they get the choice of, am I going to go work for Amazon or this? And by the way, I have choices at these contingent, staffing agencies that I can get to this position, but that brand is consistent for all of these that are supplying to them. That has to occur because the talent is so confused and going crazy with everybody hitting them up with, we'll get you this. And in the end, they find out that mystery client, it's really Amazon at the end that's hiring, but these 20 agencies are doing their own little magic to try and recruit me. So I think if agencies start to work together, the entire direct sourcing model can be more streamlined than what it is today. Otherwise, it's kind of fractured this way. One person here, the client here, and this many agencies in between that are sitting trying to be in between. There's got to be a better way, which is the way we are going through tech.
Yeah, I think another thing to think about, and I think, we know from our own research that 40% of candidates that sit in a client's internal database are willing to accept contractor roles. And typically we see the TA teams, it's very difficult to mine those databases because they've become so large. It's easier to just go out and advertise. And so one of the creative things I think that our curation partners have done is said, look, let us do an invite process. We don't have to integrate with anything. It's not complicated. We will do an invite process to determine how many of those people in your current database are, one, available, and two, willing to take a contractor role versus a full-time role. And let's see the talent pools with those candidates first, and then use this omni-sourcing channel approach. And you've heard everybody talk about different sourcing channels to continue to fill those talent pools. But it really allows the client to leverage the investment they've already made in that talent. Because there's a lot of talent in there that are very interested in working for the brand, and they're not as concerned whether it's a full-time role or a contractor role.
Yeah, Karen, that sounds a lot like total talent management, which is another buzzword, right? But no, it sounds like you guys are actually doing that, right? When you think about someone who came into this entity, just interested in working with Amazon, right?
Yeah.
And now they're presented with contract opportunities, right? It opens up doors for them. And Sammy, totally agree with you, right? Candidates want to know who that company is oftentimes. Remove the mystery from it, right? I think is how you said it. And I think direct sourcing very much opens up that avenue. But when you think about it also, candidates, especially post-pandemic, we want to know which companies we're going to go work for. That became increasingly clear that people want to align with the companies that they identify with, right? And so when we think about that in this contract world, now we're opening that up to folks that would go work these contracts in these companies. They get that choice to really think about who they want to work with versus just being approached. And we're still going to see the standard approach where the mystery is in it as well. And maybe there's some excitement in that, right? Who is this company? Let me explore it. But I'm excited for this new world for sure. So Karen, you're talking about this database, right, that starts to grow from these talent profiles in other system, it sounds like, but they make their way to these direct sourcing platforms, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
What role does the profile play in this, and what does that look like with the historic document of the resume? Like how does all that play together? Can you talk to us a little bit about profiles?
Yeah, absolutely. So we knew that when we developed the technology, it was really important to create a platform that was very easy for the candidate to create their profile. It needed to be easy. We wanted it to make sure it didn't take a lot of time. So from a profile perspective, it typically takes a candidate a minute to a minute 30 to create their profile. It's very much click-based. They don't have to fill in a lot of information, and we capture about 90 data points as opposed to 45 data points that maybe a LinkedIn would have on a profile. And that really allows us to identify the right candidate and the most qualified candidate quickly. For our technology, we've really created what we call a federated profile for candidates that apply through LiveHire. And what this means is they have a single profile that they update. And as they update, it will update across any other talent pools that they're a part of. So if they sign up for ABC talent pool, but they also see something on LinkedIn and want to apply for, I don't know, I'm just going to throw a name out there, the Coca-Cola talent pool, for example. They could actually apply to both talent pools, but their one profile basically travels with them. So think of it as a passport that they carry with them. They only have to update it once. They only have one profile, and it stays updated for any profile they have within any other LiveHire talent community.
I love the passport term.
Yeah. Easy.
Sammy, I know you guys are doing things a bit unique when it comes to profiles. Tell us a little bit about WorkNow's approach to the candidate profile.
The whole premise of WorkNow was the fact that I and my executive staff, all of us that came in together into this industry, were tired that one candidate that is unemployed, at least what we saw in Southern California, has to wait hours at a time, agency to agency. There's 65 agency, maybe about 5 miles, 10 miles from me. Here's someone who's unemployed, now has to go out and fill out yay thick paper, this much, and each one of them you go hopping. It was not feasible, and nothing had been done about it for the last year. So what we said, okay, here's an app, download just the way Karen described, quickly put it together, your simple profile. Next, if you are on this, you can just send that profile over to as many staffing agencies or employers that you need to, immediately if you needed to, instantly. You can change each one so that the profile can be different for a forklift driver. Again, I'm talking about that world. Next was, once we have got you on a biometric, so our stack, just to understand, starts all the way from sourcing, matching, time and labor management to payroll and billing. It's the entire platform. So once you've entered the platform, you've been on a biometric as well as blockchain. We've got it running on the side. Once we have got you that you have enrolled yourself for a specific staffing agency or specific employer, and we've enrolled you in a clock, now you are deployed throughout the ecosystem. Either you can be deployed through a certain agency, staffing agency, that we know exactly who you are and where you're going, because the clocks are all over the place. Number two is because we run these large MSP programs, universal programs, where there could be 30 agencies and 8,000 employees. If you walked in and you just clocked in even in one clock, it follows you to that staffing agency, and we stop them from temp napping each other, because the program may say that if I'm employed by agency A, for 30 days, agency B cannot take me. So we've really done that through these two methods, is biometric and blockchain, so that this individual within that program, none of the agencies are worried about someone taking their temp or the temp working for two separate agencies within the same work week, because compliance is a big issue within California. I don't need to tell that to anybody here. It's the toughest state to be in, and all of these are basically kept through that profile, so that individual within WorkNow, with maybe a few 100,000 profiles today, we know exactly where they've moved from top all the way till the time they've got paid. So that's kind of how we approached it on our side.
I really like that. Yeah, this sounds like the whole candidate ownership or right to represent these technologies could kind of change that paradigm, right? I don't have to sign that document every time this agency, maybe I do, but it sounds like the technology can track that in your case, Sammy, and actually categorize the talent to the agencies that do represent them.
Yes, the biggest problem that we have faced, which I think everybody here probably agrees to, is the toughest part is one agency is unwilling to share the same talent with another agency.
Yeah.
If just that mindset changed, this industry would move forward by leaps and bounds. If only everybody just sat in one place and said, okay, we're all servicing this area for this type of talent. Let's just get our talent pool together. Now we know what that individual did, a good job or a bad job, and we have every level of talent that we can know exactly what they did. tardiness, all of that, everything can be incorporated for rating systems. But again, with staffing agencies, they seem to be very, very possessive of their talent.
Yeah. No, we've seen that as well. But in past roles, I've chatted about candidate sharing, and it always seems the first to go might lose. But if you could convince everyone at the same time, let's do this, then maybe yes, it has some legs.
Yes.
Yeah, no, totally agree with that. Any other thoughts on that, guys? If not, we'll kind of keep moving here.
No, I'm good.
And I saw a question come in earlier. It looks like Praneeth, you grabbed it, but any other comments on this question? So, how much input do clients have in messaging for those in the invite process? So can clients fine tune or control that messaging?
Yes, we have templates that we will absolutely share with our clients, but we can also tailor that messaging specifically to things that they want. For example, on the landing page or in the communications with the talent during the invite process.
And Praneeth, I saw your answer there, but any other commentary for those?
Yeah, I think
the chat?
For us specifically, at least in experience of executing, especially with extremely large Fortune global companies, we have to get involved in walking through a customer's multiple touch points, how a candidate is engaged. We collaborate starting from the branded landing page and heavily customize the landing page based on very specific branding requirements that a customer has, and then how the candidate is engaged, what channels we're getting engaged, what the messaging is, on top of the templating of an automated and non-automated workflow. Each and every template is something they can own, review, change. That is very dynamic in nature. It doesn't have any restrictions. So that's super important to have that flexibility, because many a times we all probably experience this in our world. And based on how brand is recognized and how it is perceived, a subject line based on how it is written, you would open an email. And how you would respond to an SMS message based on how it is written too, whether you want to respond or just block that number out. So that's super important, having that control based on the company's culture and brand, how they would like to represent. It's very sensitive, and we want to give that whole power of that to the customer, but assist them with the best practices, some examples of which will increase, but also measure that particular successes. Or this particular template, this particular messaging has this much open rate to click-through rates, is something very evident to them.
Yeah. So for the agencies here, if this is not a capability you have in-house today, there's two things I'm seeing. One, we need to up our game and be able to operate at this executive level from a communications perspective and be able to equip these companies with resources to do that. I've also seen models where the companies themselves will take over this piece of the direct sourcing element, right? Talent acquisition or a comms team might come alongside the direct sourcing curator, as an example, and they'll own this piece of the equation, with the curator actually being the ones to deploy those communications or leverage them throughout the process. So it's really all in how you plan to operate with these programs, and obviously the companies that you might be working with. But certainly something to think about contractually as it relates to these agreements that you might be looking at direct sourcing with some of these clients. I want to shift gears a little bit, fun topic here. So I've heard direct sourcing referenced and compared to where MSP and VMS was 15 years ago. I said that earlier in the call. And I've also heard a comment recently, which I kind of like, that if you really think about it and break down direct sourcing and what it truly is, it actually is taking us back about 15, 20 years ago to where master vendor, prime vendor, whatever we want to call it, was a thing, right? And for those of us, I'll put myself barely in that category, but old enough to remember those days, it looked like a vendor on premise or a primary vendor that actually provided the services of staffing for a company. And then they might have a set of sub vendors they'd leverage, or like a tier 2 supply base. And so we're seeing direct sourcing actually being leveraged to get back into that prime vendor seat oftentimes. And so, just as we kind of think about though VMS and MSP and kind of how that all played out these last 10, 15 years, and we start looking at direct sourcing, what are some things we can learn from the MSP VMS era that we've lived in this last decade?
Well, I'm going to date myself. I'll jump in here. I remember I was working for a staffing company as a recruiter when MSPs kind of first came into the market. And I just remember thinking, like, this is never going to take off. Like, clients want the direct relationship. Staffing companies are never going to work with an MSP. They're a competitor. And it wasn't long after that I determined that we can't just stick our head in the sand and pretend like this doesn't exist, because it was definitely gaining traction. And as a staffing company, I remember going to our CEO at the time and saying, look, we've got to figure out how to play with the MSPs in order to service our clients, and how are we going to evolve in order to do that. And that actually created a lot of different things in staffing. So I was part of organizations where we had created service centers, for example, where we had whole teams of recruiters that just focused on their accounts that were being, where they were delivering talent through an MSP. So I think the lesson here with direct sourcing is it's not going away. You heard us say earlier that, we know that 60% of buyers intend to implement a direct sourcing solution, probably at this point in the next 18 months to 2 years. And it's, I think there's a lot of staffing companies that feel like direct sourcing is the enemy, and I can totally understand how they get to that conclusion. But I feel like direct sourcing is a channel. It is another part of the ecosystem. And there's definitely a part that a staffing company can play in working with a direct sourcing technology, for example, to continue to evolve their solution, potentially build a new revenue stream for their organization, and continue to offer innovation to their clients, because that's always something that our clients are looking for. How are you going to, it's cost savings. How are you going to continue to innovate? And I need the best people out there. And direct sourcing is a way for you to say, I'm willing to deliver those things, but I want a bigger piece of the market. You may be offering a discount, although we have curation partners that aren't discounting their services when they enter into direct sourcing. It really depends on how you want to position yourselves as part of this ecosystem, and how you want to deliver this. So I think those are just some things that I would think about and kind of my observations at this point.
I can't date myself that back, but
All right, Pradeep, we're still into the 80s music, so it's all good. Yeah.
So I'll talk about what I've seen from VMS and my small nature of attempting to build a VMS, and also working through a marketplace with vendors and the agencies is the last few years was a bit different and difficult to navigate the direct sourcing in the sales process itself, because the industry is I think most of us could agree that most of our industry has fragmented and consolidated into MSP and VMS. There are countable VMSs which own majority of the market, countable MSPs which own majority of the market consolidation, and we're talking about the large enterprise market. We also seen transformation from enterprises who are extremely risk averse in nature, as the nature of a companies, also go and do in-house MSP, which means they are not relying on outsource. So there's a lot of transformation which happened in the last few years, which gives an indication that customers in the future state also would want to do, and we have seen those patterns of enabling themselves by building and maturing the talent acquisition function. And I somehow reason doesn't like the word temp labor. It feels like very offensive to me a bit, but we should call that as talent acquisition, which is for temp roles or temp talent acquisition itself. And I think that mentality is slowly transforming in organizations today, where they're looking this more of a talent acquisition function for fulfilling in a larger scheme of things, what kind of talent, what category of talent are we in. And one thing which is pretty obvious is the VMS, what is the highest consideration is the VMSs and the workflow around the VMSs, because we are all living in a world we want to get things done much faster. You're not waiting for your Google results to come back in 5 minutes. That's not what world we live in. And you're trying to get your pizza on your app in the next 20 minutes, and anytime you want to, you pay $1 extra to get that. So considering that workflow automation is something really, really key in the current world of the future where we are going towards, which enables, because VMSs went through this integration efforts with multiple internal elements. And the reason for that is, again, how do you do the workflow automation to move things faster? That's pretty evident that most of the time when we are looking at implementing direct sourcing in the current world, we can reflect that back and ensure we consider that decisions through that. And the last important part, I think, it could be controversial also, but at the end of the day, even in the current majority of the programs, if you look at sourcing as a model and what vendors are enabled within that, a lot of MSP organizations who are non-neutral also are also in a neutral program, but technically it's non-neutral. You'll also have a staffing organization part of it, which is pretty obvious. So it is reality that in the market you will see a lot of that adopting going forward, because that's a large part of revenue which is kind of getting shifted. So there's a lot of piece of revenue which gets shifted when you take that consolidation market for the why did we do the consolidation, why this consolidation happened. It does bring a larger impact, and we could assume that where that larger impact will have once each individual players are maturing themselves, and how that revenue shift happens. Something really important to consider as an industry of where we will be marching in the next 5 years from revenue shift within a program. That said, even the niche part of it doesn't go away. The niche speciality of any vendor doesn't go away. Like Sammy mentioned about something very intrinsic about light industrial roles and the problem statements that he's solving for in Southern California area, that is not ever end, and that is going to be the key winner as we move forward.
And Praneeth, I'll date myself again. I remember the time when I was running staffing. We used to run about maybe 12,000 temps through our agency. We used to have in the early 90s and mid 90s, folks lined up outside in the morning by 50 to 100 people. And the first thing we would do is get them some water and then say, okay, we can only interview X amount of you every day. VMS and MSPs came in at that point because they, as they say, the hordes are at the gate. That's how it used to be, that they didn't want people knocking on their doors all day with agencies because there were too many candidates and not enough jobs. There was a recession. The need changes. Why would the client open up and said, to me, VMS is a barrier personally. It could be controversial. I really don't care, because I think it's meant for a certain type of contingent labor. It's perfect for. In my world, it is trying to get the person there as soon. That's like we built a universal program. All it is really a client can just plug in the job orders, give it to as many agencies, or one agency can become the primary, and basically run a program without paying 3 points in between and losing it. Because in the end today, everybody needs the talent. And guess what? The clients are open to direct sourcing. They're open to anything you can throw at them, including technology, and they're willing to pay it. Whereas the conversation we used to have 25 years ago was everybody was racing to the bottom for the markups. That's all that was going on, because everybody had thousands of people in their talent pool, but only a few hundred jobs to fill. And as soon as this tide turns again, guess what? Us in this industry will continue to pivot accordingly, because we go where the money and the opportunity is. That's what each one of us is in the end making sure. But this industry has going to continue evolving, and you'll see the same thing change again. Hope it doesn't happen to where thousands of people are looking for 100 positions. I hope it doesn't go there.
I don't think
hopefully it just goes up this way, which I think
it's hard to imagine that. Yeah.
It's hard to imagine.
Hard to imagine. Yeah.
We used to stand there and deal with it every day.
I want to close that thought also by giving a huge amount of credit to the MSP organizations and VMSs, and now I'm part of one, so I can actually empathize and learn more. So the amount of energy and time it takes to manage a customer, to streamline an enterprise process, which looks like centralized but highly decentralized, the amount of energy and time it takes to get the response times which we want from a customer, as always, so that our candidates get hired, That's a huge amount of effort, and the process mechanism which MSPs have invested into our industry is tremendous. I think that is enough. I don't think MSPs get enough credit, but they are needed, or else it could be much more chaotic as an industry. We would have never progressed. VMSs from a technology side have made that even more organized from a workflow, especially with the large enterprise organizations. But yes, there is still opportunity to look through the lens of, in a modern day world of Uberizing our models of contingent labor, what other mechanics and mechanisms can be embedded into the process through integrated or non-integration fashion.
I just think the implementation is where I hats off. It's insanity to get somebody on board. But the fact is, that's part of the reason we took a completely different approach, saying, how quickly can someone become an MSP? Can you add someone in 15 minutes? Can you add somebody to a program in 20 minutes, half an hour? Those are really the matrices we're chasing, because initially to set somebody up, it's a pain. And I have full sympathy being on the IT side as well as in the implementation side of the teams. You look at their faces and go, and it's one of the most difficult things to do, but it depends on what type of contingent labor you're plugging into a place. And it's a tedious work. And MSPs anybody should be able to be an MSP as quickly as possible if they want to be in that role.
Yeah. I like where this is going. I agree that technology probably needs to differ depending on the environment, the client, right? There's lots of elements that play into this. Yeah. There was a chat earlier today, one of the sessions, and they were saying managers actually like consuming things in the way that the profiles are set up in these systems like you guys have, right? Like managers themselves actually enjoy that, right? That as a hiring manager, me getting a resume, if I'm not a recruiter, like, cool, it's like, it's a document, right? You've kind of got to start to extract value from that document and understand what it means. But these profiles, it seems that the managers like that. Yet, I hear on the enterprise side of the equation, we've got a standard process. Everything goes through our VMS, so it's integrated through the VMS, and we want one tool for everybody, right? So I'm curious you guys' thoughts. How does direct sourcing, or what you guys, your solutions that you're building, how does it play with a VMS? Praneeth, we'll start with you, right? You work with a VMS company now. Yeah.
So I think the problem statement is much bigger when enterprise says it has to be a single source of a solution, right? And we all face the same, right? Imagine this, right? If you have 3 different email addresses, and let's say Apple on your phone, or your phone never operated or gave you a particular app to have multiple accounts added. Imagine how many apps you'll start using for communications, right?
Sure.
So that also empathizes about, that is a very small problem that we are talking about. Imagine the scale of the problems in a highly decentralized, in multiple lines of businesses, multiple hiring managers, multiple practices. So that centralization of a VMS from a process management, including billing management, invoicing management, compliance, extending that into an SOW, it's must to have. It's not a choice anymore for in the style of an organization as is working. But when it comes to direct sourcing, that's where I think integration becomes a key. And yes, hiring managers enjoy, but at the same time, if it is not centralized, what would happen is half of the hiring managers would like to do it. Another half of the hiring managers have never gained attention or into it. So there is kind of deflected path, and you can't, again, go into decentralized, defragmented market. Ideally, what we have seen is when the process is centralized, when you are capable enough to deliver the decisions and insights within the VMS for the particular decisions the hiring managers is looking for, which are available on this candidate profile, that's a key winner. What we have seen as an experiment too is, for an example, Glider is a partner of ours, fully embedded into it. We went first to the market. And the reason we made that investment was that assessment data points about a candidate reflected in the same fashion all the way into the VMS through integration created a huge impact on the fill rates and the response rates from a customer. But that said, will that be the same for light industrial? The answer is no, because the experience that a hiring manager who's sitting on, who's at a floor, trying to recruit people, going through a VMS problems, probably there is a challenge. And that's where I think we found an opportunity to automate on top of VMSs without disrupting that, where you're still enabling that user experience through a modern technology from a user interface, but still back channeling that through automation into VMS. So that you're not disrupting, you're serving both sides of the purpose. That's my take on it.
So as a staffing agency, if you ever ask light industrial guys, right, you tell them VMS and they, again, gives them hives and they go, God, now I got to deal with it. Because think about it. First, my margins are cut in. Light industrial, very low margins. Number two, I get stringent, very stringent way of getting delivered the job orders. Then I have no real time knowing if four staffing agents serving the same customer. Where do the orders sit? Next is billing is a big issue always, because time and labor management, if you didn't click it right, you're stuck. It's come a long way from there. Today's VMS is much more modern, much more thoughtful about what they're doing. It serves the customer really well, but I really challenge everyone to make sure that as we are going down the path of MSP and VMS, that most of them are getting friendly to also the contingent labor or the staffing agencies as well in this whole ecosystem, because everybody has always looked at where are we looking at this industry today? One is there's a segment of us only looking at the client talent today, which is very critical. The talent experience has to be I think there's room for improvement for everyone to do better, all of us.
Yeah, agreed.
Number two is the client. Everybody always used to serve the client, and we used to basically not bother with the rest of it. As long as our efficiency was good, we can serve. So now it's really two masters we have to serve, the client as well as the staffing, the actual labor. And those two, if they're focused on this alone, it's a mix between the two that we, at least in the staffing industry, we have two masters to serve. And at all times, we are trying to make sure both sides, depending on which one's heavier when. So I really feel that this is VMS and MSP, they've done leaps and bounds from where it's come, for all of us, for that matter.
2 minutes.
2 minutes. Let's do this, guys. We have like 15 questions we didn't get to. I'm sure there were some in the chat we might not have got to as well. But if I'm a staffing company on this call and I want to get into this space, what should I be thinking about? What should I be doing today? And then another question, you guys can answer either one and you each get a minute. But where does this go, right? Where does this go from here? And I'll let you pick whatever one. Karen, you want to start us off? 1 minute?
Sure. Yeah. So I think if you're a staffing company thinking about this, do your homework. Talk to technology companies that are in this space. Talk to payrolling companies that are doing this to understand, lessons learned, what's successful, what are those best practices that I talked about earlier. I think it's really important to understand too that, the persona of the curator is very different when it comes to direct sourcing than a traditional recruiter. And that really comes down to technology, right? And it's also a very proactive approach. And not to say that recruiters out there aren't doing things that are proactive, but it's a little bit different. So you want recruiters that are tech savvy, that understand the importance of engagement. So if you have recruiters that are doing a lot of high volume hiring, the level of engagement may be less than if you're talking about a direct sourcing solution. They should have great communication skills, the ability to present to your end client, and really understand the appetite for change management within your organization. In our experience, when you've got really seasoned recruiters that are really good at what they do, they're a little bit more resistant to change because what they're doing is working in some capacity. It may be worth considering hiring recruiters and curators that are specifically dedicated to direct sourcing and the platform in which they're using. And I think consider, are there additional roles that I'm going to need to hire for to support this? I think, we also have staffing companies that are using our technology internally to help them build talent pools across their client organization. So I think that's a great way to kind of start using the technology and then building your direct sourcing solution from there. So those are some of my initial thoughts.
Yeah. So I know we're at the top of the hour, and I love that this topic always goes the full, any session I've ever been on, we always run out of time. That's clear that there's so much to talk about here, guys. So I appreciate you guys being on. Thank you everyone for joining the session, and we look forward to talking more about direct sourcing throughout 2022. Everyone have a great afternoon.
Thank you so
everyone.
much.
Thanks,
Thank you,
guys.
Praneeth. Thank you, Karen. Thank you,
Thank
Dustin.
you, everyone.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.